Hi, Intuitive viewers. Welcome. I have a friend with me today who actually I was on his podcast with his co-host, Tamara. It's called Spirit Cafe. This is John Davis. Hi, John.
Hi, Kim. How are you?
Good. Now, John is on today to share with us a very unique, interesting, very spiritual story. It's the story about John and a past life that he became aware of around the age of 28. It was at a psychic fair where it began. In the interim between the time that he found out and an actual regression taking place, about 19 different psychics told him the same exact thing. So that led, John, to your an actual regression. You thought, okay, all these people are saying this. Is there truth to it? So tell us about the regression and what you learned and how it changed you, I guess, from that moment on.
Sure. As it was 19 different psychics, as you said, and as the son of a lady who had her master's degree in liturgy and was head of liturgical doctrine at our Catholic Church, psychics and seers were not a good thing in our world.
Right.
The Catholics don't like that kind of thing. And so I was one of those guys who was very much, I wanted science to show me this. And so I searched out past life regression therapists, and I wanted credentialed ones. And I found a lovely woman in Washington, D.C. who regressed me. And I went in there, and at this point in my life, I had already been a meditator. I've been meditating for years. My brain was already very, very comfortable with getting relaxed. And so I went in, and she was actually kind of shocked at how quickly I went under. But I went under, and it was a very unique experience, because what first happened was I was sitting there and I was looking down. So imagine if you're looking down at your legs and you're sitting on the ground, and I'm looking down at my legs, and my legs are bare, but on top of my legs are a bundle of ropes and knots and nets. And what it was a net. And I was literally tying the net in places where the net had torn. I was fixing the net.
Right.
And so I'm sitting there working on this net, and like I said, my legs were bare, which is a very strange thing. And I'm not really understanding, where I am. And then I kind of hear this commotion. Now, I'm a very science-minded individual. And so when this regression was done, I just want to add this in here now. I did go back and research several things that I saw. Like I saw a boat on the shoreline that had a very distinctive hook on the front of it. And I found out later that boats from 2,000 years ago had this distinctive hook for pulling the nets. You would throw your net, and then you would loop the rope into this hook and pull. And so, so this was kind of a fishing device. And then what I was wearing was what was referred to 2,000 years ago as a fisher's coat, because you might have, in your everyday life, you might have worn long robes, but the second you get on a boat and fall over in long robes, you drown. So they gave you this short tunicky thing with bare arms, and that was called a fisher's coat. And there's one reference to it in the Bible where Jesus is on shore, and he calls out to Peter, who's on a boat, and Peter stands up and it says in the Bible, puts on his fisher's coat because he was fishing naked.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Peter was a rebel. Anyway, so I'm sitting there on that beach, and I'm fishing those nets, and I hear a commotion over to my left side. And I look over and I see those boats along the shore, and I stand up, and now I can really see what I'm wearing. And I look over and I walk over to this crowd of people and it's a crowd of people around this, whatever's in the center. I can't even see at this point what's in the center. There's a crowd of people that are just really excited. And I walked over to this crowd, and as I walked over to this crowd, it kind of opened up, and there before me was the person that I now call Jeshua ben Joseph, which is the name of Jesus. Jeshua being Jesus and Ben Joseph being son of Joseph. I knew him as Jeshua ben Joseph in that life. And he looked at me, and he was a little shorter than I was, which kind of surprised me. And he had dark curly, sort of almost nappy hair, but it had a reddish tint to it, and full beard. And he looked at me and he smiled, and he walked over to me and he reached his hand out and he placed it on my heart. And if you ever hear my regression, which is fascinating to hear, you'll hear, I actually had, this is the only part of the regression I had to edit, because I had about 7 or 8 minutes of me moaning. And what had happened was, in the experience, was I was immersed in unconditional love without my fear, without any fear at all. And in that moment, I realized that I was completely pure energy and one with everything. And that it was my fear that had kept me separate. And that not only that, but every person on earth is a creator of their experience. And it's through our fears that limit us from creation. And by having this experience where I had no fear, I had complete blissful joy. And, and it's interesting, but in the Gospel of John, he says, God is love. And that's what I experienced. God was source, yada, yada, whatever you want to call it. Tamara and I call it yada, yada. Pure bliss, unconditional love, and nothing else. That's what our source is. And our fear was given to us as a gift to experience that love fully, because you can't know that love without feeling the opposite.
Right.
And so you can't measure it or understand what it is. And so I've been having this experience where I'm just lost in this moment. And then the regressionist says, take us to the next most important moment.
Right.
And the next most important moment was me standing there feeling completely deflated, watching him walk away. And I'm like, like gasping for air almost. And
right.
This was a moment that I found really interesting. I've often wondered, as a altar boy and a Catholic, you see in the Bible where Jesus comes around and the people that he meets leave their life. They walk away from everything.
Right.
And it wasn't until that moment in that regression when I realized why. Would you be able to walk away from your life? Well, you would totally be able to walk away from your life if you realized your life was pure energy and everything around you is part of your own creation. And that person just showed you what it was and how you can do it.
Right. Right.
So that's why I walked away. And in the regression, this is the big moment that my co-host has been waiting for as well. For 10 years, I've kind of not talked about who I was in that past life, because it became a sort of a struggle for me. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But I remembered the life of John, the beloved apostle. And I remembered walking with Jeshua ben Joseph and learning from Jeshua ben Joseph and experiencing Jeshua ben Joseph. And once that regression was done, those memories continued on for years. I would have moments where I would just suddenly have a full-blown memory. And let me really kind of express, when I say memory, this was a full sensory experience. I could feel the sand, I could feel the stones, I could feel the wind. I mean, I was fully immersed. If I was there.
Right.
And that's the way it happened when I wasn't in the regression. I would sit down in the chair and suddenly I'd have this experience again. But in that regression, as she led me through, the last thing that she said, she was very professional in the fact that she wanted to make sure that I knew it was real. And she wanted to do that by taking me into a very, very, very big emotional shift so that I would have an experience.
Right.
And in the regression, you hear me experience the crucifixion. And I'm screaming and I'm weeping and wailing. And she had to take me back out of the regression because I was uncontrollable at that point. It was the most profound thing that I had ever experienced in my life. And I did go on after that to go speak about it. The first reader wrote a book about it, which is still out there. We haven't really done much with that at all lately, but I've been called for several years to get back into my spiritual work. And so this is the beginning of all that journey for me now. The Bible talks about reincarnation. And people say, no, it doesn't. That's not in the Christian thinking. And at one point in the Bible, Jesus says to the disciples, who do they say that I am? And the disciples say, some say you're Elijah returned. And Jesus said, no, I tell you, he has come already and you have shunned him, referring to John the Baptist. So
interesting.
The disciples had to believe that Elijah could return and be Jesus of Nazareth.
Right.
And Jesus had to believe that Elijah could return and be John the Baptist. So that's reincarnation in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you had this experience where you, and let me ask you too, when you have an experience like that, because we're built to kind of, as human beings, we're built to we have these experiences that are spiritual experiences. And then our mind has to come in and undo it or say, it was out my imagination. So how did you come to accept this with your mind? The mind plays tricks on you, and how did you accept it?
I struggled with it for a long time. And in fact, right after it all happened, I was like, oh no, that's not me. And I was pushing it off. And the first reader was like, you got to do this work. She kept pushing me. And I was like, no, I don't. Right. No, I don't have to do this. Cause I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to be the weird guy who thought he was Napoleon. Right. Right. Because Napoleon's always the joke that always talks about past lives.
Right.
I didn't want to be that guy. And a lot of things in my life were very unique and different from the time I was young. And it wasn't until after that regression that I started seeing the pre-patterns. I had a lot of GI Joes when I was a little boy. I am the only one of my friends who actually put my GI Joe on a crucifix and crucified him.
Right.
I'm the only one who did that. When I was a little boy, I told my dad, I said, do you know that Davis, my last name Davis, means son of David, which is what they used to call Jesus. My father was not amused because I was saying I was somebody else's son. but these are the things that were happening. I also had a series of quote unquote, as a child, imaginary friends. And to me, I saw them, I talked to them.
Right.
And to give you an example, when I was five years old, my parents had 6 kids when I was that young. Later on, they had a 7th, but they had 6. At that point, I was 6. I was 5 years old, and we were down at a friend's summer house. There was a series of break-ins in their neighborhood. We went down to check on their house. And when I went to their summer house in the summertime, I would go in, I'd get a toy, and I'd go over to the beach because the beach was right across the street, and I'd play in the sand on the beach. So I got to the house and I did what I always did. I got a toy, went across the street, started playing in the sand. Came back and they were gone. They forgot me and they drove away. And I sat down, very upset, 5-year-old crying. My mom was, when they realized I wasn't in the car, because they had 6 kids in the car, they just overlooked one, right?
Right. Yeah.
And they got up the road, and my dad asked if I wanted ice cream, and they're like, he's not here. And they spun the car around and went back. But I'm sitting there crying on this steps of this house, and this little boy walks up out of nowhere. He says, don't you worry, it's going to be okay. And he didn't, he just left. He sat there and he talked to me, little blonde hair boy. He said, don't worry, they're coming back. They'll be here soon. And he's literally just sat there and told me these things. And then he says, okay, they're here now. I'll talk to you later. And he walks around the back of the house, and they drove around the front of the house. They never saw him. Right. So I had experiences like that my entire life.
Right.
When I started going back and looking at my life, my brother told me about a time when I had out-of-body experiences as a little child, where they were all in my room. I had a high fever. And all of a sudden I started saying, I'm on the ceiling. I'm above you. I'm looking down on you. I'm taller than you. I kept saying, I'm taller than you. So he's telling me all these experiences that I had as a kid. Now, as I grew up, I had moments where I now looking back after this regression make perfect sense to me. Like
Right.
there was one time I walked into, when I was, I guess I was 18 or 19, I walked into a convenience store and someone, and the cashier gave me $5 too much change. And I walked out and I was walking to the car and I realized he gave me $5 too much change. I walked back inside and I said, you guys, you gave me $5 too much change. And the guy in line says, well, there's something you don't see every day, an honest person.
Oh,
And honest to God, I felt Jesus. I felt that feeling that I got. And as I walked out of that store at 18 years old, before this, 10 years before that regression,
right.
I walked out of the store and I said, Jesus, is that you? And I felt it again. So I've been having these experiences my entire life and not realizing
Right.
what it was about. And then I sent you a picture, which I, if you want to share that on the video, you're more than welcome
Yeah,
to.
I will. I will.
I snapped a picture in Norway when I was doing one of my USO tours years ago,
Mhm.
and the face of Jesus showed up in the picture. Well, half the face of Jesus showed up in the picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
and then I took the Shroud of Turin and I split that picture in half and I put it on the other side of the picture and it completes the face.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
just blows my mind. So to me, there was a lot of things that I could look back after the fact, but during the time,
Right.
I really struggled. And I
Right.
was constantly asking, because now I'm diving deep into spirituality. Now I'm asking for signs. And please give me a sign, right?
Right.
And then I had friends of mine who were like, John, they were so supportive. I had so many great friends who were just completely supportive of everything I was going through because they knew that I was, I never did a drug in my life. I never drank. I drank rarely. When I was in my 20s,
Right.
I lived at a beach resort. Of course I drank.
Right.
But I wasn't a drinker. I wasn't a drug user. And I never was one of those guys. And so they knew that I wasn't insane. And
Right.
I sometimes doubted it, but they
Right.
knew.
Right.
And then I
normal.
found this book called Edgar Cayce on the Millennium, because I was really diving into Edgar Cayce at this point.
I love Edgar Cayce. Yeah.
Oh, me too. So I'm reading this book, and it's a little tiny, one of those little tiny paperbacks that they put out, Edgar Cayce on the Millennium. And I'm reading this book, and I come across the passage in the book, and the passage says, "John the Beloved will again be called John."
Oh my
And,
gosh.
and,
I just got
and
chills.
and I was like, and I turned to my friend and said, does that say what I think that says? That's what it says, right? So I went to the Edgar Cayce Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach and walked through there. And eventually that book that the first reader had written, we did a book tour for that book. And we ended up speaking in Virginia Beach and at several of the associations for research and enlightenment, spoke at unity churches all over the country and metaphysical centers and holistic centers all over the country. And it became, that's where my, over the course of several years, I was doing private spiritual counseling, helping people break out of their own limitations. That's what I did for many, many years. And it ended up becoming a detriment in the end. So I don't know if you want to go into that right now or not.
Yeah, I do. I kind of want to ask, so as so you kind of come to accept it, or at least you've kind of integrated it into your life at that point when it happens, and then you decide I'm gonna share this kind of, on a larger scale, let people know.
Well, I just want I want to say I think it would be morally wrong of me not to share it, because the lessons that I learned are not for me; they're for everybody.
Right.
And for anybody who's gets interested in past lives and regression, the main foundational thing that I learned in this, the first thing, the primer of everything else I teach, starts with the fact that you have to be here now. It does not matter who you were, it only matters who you are in this moment. And so, and that's the struggle that led me to the next problems in my life.
Well, right. And when this is kind of growing and people are realizing who you are as you go and speak, and is it starting to in a way take on a life of its own. Like it kind of gets away from you in a way. You're
It
all of a sudden it's kind of bigger than you are. And so then at that point, what is happening when that happens? And explain how people are reacting to you, like how this is happening. So
okay.
explain that, and then also explain what's happening to you internally as this
Okay.
is kind of blowing up into something that is not exactly what you anticipated.
Right. Internally, I really felt like I had things to share. And like I said, I think it would be morally wrong of me not to share the lessons that I had learned because they were so powerful. And so I was all in. And I mean, I put myself out there. I had websites. I had
Right,
everything. Everything was out
right.
there. And as it grew, it was very, very interesting. People began to get really, really focused on who I was.
Right.
You were John the Beloved. Oh my God, I just met John the Beloved. And they stopped hearing what I was teaching and they focused on that past life. And I'll tell you something else that's really interesting. I had a stalker who knew that she was supposed to be John the Beloved's lover. I had a famous author who was a gay man who knew that when he met me, I was going to have an epiphany and take him as my lover. And I mean, I had had a lot of, I had people who were specifically coming up to me, expecting me to recognize them from that past life. Right. And the interesting thing was, I have met people who I go, oh, I totally know who that is. I have that feeling. Right. And I get the others who are like, who come up and say, I was Peter. And I'm like, no, you weren't. Right. That's not what I get anyway.
Right.
But everybody wanted their validation. And one of the struggles I had an author who did some work for me, and she was phenomenal. She was great. But, she wrote a book that had John twice in the title. And we'd go on a book tour, and she got very upset that they didn't want to talk to the author. They wanted to talk to John. Right. So that friendship ended. It just got worse and worse and worse. But what really became the turning point for me was I really wanted to do good in the world. I wanted to bring that message forth and change people's lives. And what was happening was I'd go to a center and I would speak and have a really impactful speech. And then I would do 2 days of individual sessions. And I'm, sometimes 14, 16-hour days of just one after another. They'd bring me food in between, because I wanted to hit as many people as I possibly could. And I'd come back the next year and the same people would come in with the same problems. And I'm like, they didn't take anything I said. And then I had others who came in and, they still email me saying, yeah, I came in with a bad, arm, and my arm's fine. It's been great. I have an Indian man I worked with he had a problem with his feet. His biggest concern in life was he could no longer dance at weddings. And he did Indian dancing. So, and he still dances at weddings today. And so, I get those kind of talks too, that they've, but I'm one of those guys who thinks that since we create the illusion around us and we create our experience, it's our belief that's creative. Right. And even Jesus said, it's your faith that heals you. He never said it's your faith in me that heals you. It's your faith that heals you. And when you take it out of Christianity and what Jesus said, and take a look at what Buddha and Krishna said, they said, Buddha said, what you think you become, you create your world. Krishna said, you are the culmination of your thought. The Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. Right. So that's what I'm teaching. And so what I was finding was when I would go to these centers, they would go, oh, it's John. And they gravitate to John because John was John the Beloved. And it's not, who I was is not important at all, but the information needs to be taken in and lived in the present moment.
Something occurred as you were talking about this, something occurred to me. Do you think that this is what happened what happened to you on a smaller scale, but the same kind of thing that happened to Jesus, that
Absolutely,
they started to
absolutely.
get caught up in the all the magic and mystery and the celebrity kind of not,
You
and
got to remember,
they got away from the messages.
when you look at the Bible and you look at what is attributed to Jesus himself, greater works than I have done, you will do. Whatever you ask in God's name is granted. Nothing will be impossible for you. Jesus washed his disciples' feet to prove to them that he was no better than them, right?
Right.
He also did a thing where he says, I am the Son of God, but he said, you are the children of God. The only difference in those two statements is one of them lived it and declared it, and the other ones hadn't yet. Right? I can say to you, you're the child of God, and if you step into that role, you become your Christed self, and your Christed self can create anything into your experience. And I am. Let me tell you a little bit of a story that you don't know about me. Right?
Okay, I'm all ears.
22 years old, I was well on the way to becoming a stuntman and a fight director. I did a comedy sword fighting show called Hack and Slash all over the world. I was on the front lines of Iraq and Afghanistan doing my show, did all this stuff. I did over 4,000 live comedy sword fighting stunt shows in my life.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. At 22 years old, before I did all those 4,000 stunt shows, I climbed up into a van to help a guy unload it. And as I lifted it out of the van, I collapsed and my spine split in two.
Oh
and
my gosh.
they hauled me to the hospital. They said, you have a condition known as spina bifida occulta, and we're not sure you're ever going to walk again. And not only are we not sure you're ever going to walk again, we know that if you do walk, you will never have a physical career. And my dream in life was to do sword fights and comedy shows. Right. And in the hospital bed, I got into a book by Bruce Lee, which took me down the concepts of staying very present. This is all before the John the Beloved stuff.
Right.
Right. And I got the principles that Jesus taught me later out of this book, the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, staying very present, staying very flexible, keeping your eye on what you're believing. And I decided not to take the doctor's belief. And in a year and a half after that incident, I was standing on top of a 3-story tower, and I jumped off and landed in a fall pad.
Oh my gosh.
And I went on and did over 4,000 live comedy sword fighting stunt shows. But that's before I knew about that I'm the creator of the experience. That was just me taking it myself. So I didn't need to have Jesus tell me or John the Beloved tell me. It is just the natural flow of life. We all have the ability to create anything into our experience. It's just a matter of knowing and believing we can, and doing the 3 things that you can only do in your present moment: thought, word, and deed. Put those 3 things into action in your present moment, the I am moment, and you can create anything.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer in that. I'm also a huge I love, I don't know if you read Eckhart Tolle. I talk about him all the time on my channel, but
the power of now.
The power of now, exactly. And the new earth. And he talks about, he does a lot of interpreting Jesus in a way I'd never heard interpreted before. He interprets it as when he talks about, forgive them for they know not what they do, as saying basically they're unconscious. They're not, they have no, they're not in touch with that soul part of themselves. They're completely lost in form. Right. They're lost in this world. And I wonder, because even as you were talking, I was thinking, how do you, when you think of that experience now, do you think maybe do you think they weren't ready for it? Do you think some people were and some people weren't? That's always the way it is, because that's kind of for Jesus the same thing. Some people got it, some people didn't. And
that's exactly right. exactly right. What's interesting to me about that time, I don't think that a lot of people were ready for it, but in this time right now of all this polarity and everything that's going on right now, I look at this time of polarity very enthusiastically, because this, in my opinion, this time of polarity is just the growing pains. We are shifting into a new and better world. The world is predominantly positive anyway, and most people don't even realize it.
Right.
To give a basic example of what I mean by that, I live in Akron, Ohio, and if I commuted to Cleveland every day, I'd probably pass 1,000 cars on the road. And every day I might see one fender bender off to the side of the road. Probably not, but pretty much every day I'd see one, right? Tonight on the news, what's going to be there? The fender bender.
Right.
What should be the headline on the news is that 999 cars made it safely to their destination without a problem. That's miraculous if you think about it, right? Right? We're not only is the world predominantly positive, it's 999% more positive, or 99.9% more positive. So,
Right.
and I think that the polarity and the upheaval that we're seeing now are the people who aren't ready to hear it. But I think there's far fewer of them nowadays.
Yeah,
I think, but they're the loudest. The squeaky wheel gets the attention, but I think they're the loudest. But I think majority of the world thinks very differently, and that's which is one of the reasons why over the past year I've really been feeling like I should go back to my spiritual work, because I was working in corporate speaking for many years, for almost 10 years now, and it was very funny, because when I first went into corporate speaking, my whole intention was to bring spiritual messages, but wrap them in a corporate vocabulary. And so I'd go in and I would just talk to them about, creating in this moment and doing all these things but I'd wrap it in, productivity and goal setting and, all these things. And the last thing I would do in one of my speeches, I would find the most timid person who was wrapped in their fear in my audience, and I'd bring them on stage, and in under 5 minutes, just taking them through the process, I would break them past the fear, and they would learn to crack a bullwhip and hit targets out of my hand in 5 minutes. And it was and it was just because I knew that all I had to do was manage their fear. And that's a very specific spiritual principle. And you can find it in almost every tradition of the time. Buddha says the secret to enlightenment is the eradication of fear. In Sufism, they believe that God is on one side of a veil, and we're on the other side of the veil, and our life is the struggle against the veil, and the veil is our fear, right? And so, but when you look at it from a unique perspective, if God is love, what is fear? Fear is an emotional reaction to some future event that may or may not happen, with a focus being negative. So fear is simply negatively focused on certainty. And so our fear, and I honestly believe that every fear can be broken down to the fear of not having love. Because I think that it is that separation. And I think that it literally is everyone's struggle, whether they're spiritual, religious or not. Everyone's struggle is their fears. And what we're seeing now with the polarity and the the right and the left wings and and all that stuff, I see a lot of fear being yelled to the sky.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
yeah. So now you're sharing this, right? You're kind of like, I'm shifting kind of back into this spiritual place. Can you talk about just a little bit about when you decided, okay, I'm going to put this aside. People are, it's getting out of hand, or it's getting away from me, and I need to put this aside. What was that? How did you come to that decision? And then what was your life after that? Was your life kind of, did it feel empty, or did it feel
it absolutely felt empty. It felt like I failed. And it felt like I really felt like I had a big mission, a big purpose in life. I was supposed to carry this information forward. And when I realized that who I was more, was all they were really focusing on, and they weren't getting the lessons, then I was like, I can't be someone's crutch. And so it was very interesting. We had booked out a whole bunch of speaking events, and I went and I did every one of them. But at one point I turned to my assistant, Holly, and Holly is one of the greatest people in the world. And I turned to Holly and I said, I have to stop this. I can't do this anymore. And the reason being is, I'm becoming people's crutches. They're coming back every year for their fix.
Right.
I'm the drug of choice. And if my whole teaching is about empowering them to step into their Christed self, their energy self, their divine self, then it would be completely wrong of me to continue to be their crutch. And so I stopped. And then for years I was like, oh, what do I do from this? Because I had created my life around that experience. And
Right.
and don't get me wrong, I met amazing people. There was a book years ago called The Messengers about Nick Bunick, who remembered being the Apostle Paul. And I met with him a few times. I met James Twyman, the Peace Troubadour, and I met all these cool people and
Right.
had great experiences. But the lessons outweigh anything. And
Right.
so when over those years of going into the corporate world, I felt like I was a kind of a spy in the corporate world. I was like a spiritual spy in the corporate world, sneaking information in. And
Right.
I remember right after I stopped having that, when I had that moment of realizing that I was becoming their crutch, I had a dream, and the dream was really, really profound, because it was like I was on a river, and I was in a boat floating down a river, and the river was moving and it was fine. And then that river came to a dead still pond. And I'm sitting there in this pond, not moving anywhere towards the shore, not in motion anymore. And then I hear, hey, hey, hey. And I look over, and there's a guy on the shore, and he says, can you help me? I said, what do you need? He says, I need to find the path. And so I paddled with my hands over to the shore, and I met him on the shore, and I walked him down this path, took him to the path and put him on the path. And when I got to the path, there were more people on the path. And I said, just follow them. And I started to walk away. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm going back to get somebody else. And I realized that when I was going to all those centers, I was speaking to the choir, and that I needed to put people on the path rather than talk to people who thought they already were. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
And
it
so
does make sense.
And what I found really interesting, I'd go into the corporate environment and I would speak, and I would I'd throw out the Buddha quote here or there, or I'd throw out the little things here and there. And then at the end of the speech, I'd stand there, and all the corporate people come up and shake my hand. They'd talk to me, and there'd always be this one or two people over to the side who waited for everybody else to go. And they would walk up to me and they'd say, I know what you're talking about. And then right. And so I kind of justified it I was there to talk to them. Right. Or I was there to put these into the environment. But it was never as fulfilling as to actually be able to say, this is what I learned from someone who lived it, and not meaning John the Beloved, I mean Joshua ben Joseph, Jesus, right? He understood his connection to source, his divinity. He understood that we're all divine. And to be able to actually say that blatantly and openly is very freeing for me. So for the longest time, I wouldn't talk about it. For 10 years, I did not talk about my past life because of the fact that it was it had a negative connotation for me, because I didn't want stalkers and people thinking I was going to be their lover and all the crazy stuff.
Didn't expect that. Yeah.
I didn't expect that at all. And what was over the past year, I've been really feeling like I needed to get back to work. And then, I was one time told by a favorite teacher of mine, a guy named Joshua. He said, when you look for a path will be laid before you. But when you realize all paths turn back to self, and you go through your own door, that's where you find what you're looking for. And so people look for paths all the time. And for me, I was there, and I was looking for this way back to do my spiritual work the way I really wanted to do it. And when that happens, when you put it out there in the world, spirit, universe, God will throw some people in your path.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the first person that got thrown in my path was Tamara Zoner.
We should say your co-host on Spirit Cafe.
Absolutely. To share the story about Tamara Zoner, who is an amazing individual, just an amazing individual all the way around. She every so often smacks me with the cosmic 2x4, saying, "All right, John, get back on track." Bam.
Yeah.
That's the best friend you can have, someone who's willing to do that for you. But I interviewed her for a podcast I was in called Interaction Hero. It was a corporate podcast. And I interviewed her about positive work environments. And we finished the interview and we talked for another hour. And I was compelled to tell her about my past life. And she was not fazed by it. And she was like, "Well, what are we doing with it? Well, how are we going to do this?" She was like right on it. And then we started doing Spirit Cafe and things were going great. And then I met a couple other people. I met a man named Justin Caffrey, which, by the way, if you get him as a guest on your show, you will love him.
Okay.
He went.
I'm writing his name down right now.
He went from capitalism to Buddhism after
wow.
the death of his child. And
oh wow.
And he is so learned and so fascinating. Just a lovely person. So I got on the thing with him, and then we got off the recording. I told him my entire story again. So now people are coming into the woodwork, right? And then I did this interview with this woman named Kim Carey. You might have heard of her. And
she's amazing.
She's amazing. She's incredible, isn't she? So humble. and we finished our recording, and she says, well, and I mentioned in the thing that I had a past life experience that was pretty big. And I think I even said, I'm not going to talk about that. Then we get off the thing and Kim says, "Tell me about your past life." Yeah. I was like, okay. And I just blah, 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 blurted it all out. And then Kim, being as wonderful as Kim is, invited me to come on here. And she said, "You can share as much or as little as you want." And over the course of the time, which is only a couple of days ago, really.
Yeah.
Right. I really got thinking about, well, is it time? Is it time to do that? And I've been thinking about it for a long time. And to me, it was like the perfect time. It was perfect timing. So I think Spirit pushed me to invite you on our show. And then, I think the fact that you came back and wanted to talk to me about it was, to me, divine. And so I was like, yep, all right, let's do it.
And I'm so glad you did, because it's such a I think sometimes when people think that they're gonna, I'm getting on a spiritual path and this is what I'm doing, that all of it, that everything should fall into place and everything should be easy. And it usually is not at all. Usually it becomes even more complicated and more, in some ways, it's simpler and easier because you kind of, you have an understanding of things, but you still have to deal with the outside world, and you still have to deal with the things around you and go through your daily life. And there's a lot of challenges to that. So now that you're on this kind of path, you're kind of moving into, do you believe in life contracts, by the way, that you come in with kind of a life contract, or that you kind of set out something to do here and you do it?
It's a great question. I've had that question before. I'm not sure what I believe about it.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people like Tamara is a firm believer that she chose, the life and what she was going to do here and who's going to be her parents. And I'm unsure, but I know that all the things that happened to me had to happen for a reason. Because there's no reason I would have had out-of-body experiences at 4 years old and had, imaginary friends and all those things would never have happened to me. And then to have someone, my mom, who had her master's degree in liturgy. Now, let me tell you an interesting thing about her. Later in life, before she passed away, I asked her why she became so Catholic. And she said, well, I became so Catholic because I had an out-of-body experience during a mass. And she was
Oh,
up
wow.
out her body, and she was looking at the altar out of her body. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. But now here's this woman who had this massive experience in a church,
Right.
got her master's degree in liturgy, became head of liturgical doctrine. For those of you who don't know what that means when the priest wants to do a sermon, he has to pass it by the head of liturgical doctrine to make sure it matches the church doctrines. So in other words, the priest has to bring the sermon to my mom, and she has to approve it. Right. And
Oh,
she says,
yeah.
yes, Father, kiss the ring, go do your speech.
Yeah.
Right?
Very learned. Yes.
So here's this woman who's so devoutly Catholic and almost became a nun before she had 7 kids. um, and
Wow.
and what was interesting was when I turned 18, she said to me, and I often wonder why she said this to me. She said, John, spirituality is a personal journey. And I hope you come back to Catholicism, but you really need to figure out what you believe. And that was the most freeing and wonderful thing that she could have said.
Mm.
Because at that point, I traveled through India. I studied everything I could: Buddhism, Hinduism. I went to Baha'i, Wicca. I looked at every element, every facet.
Mhm.
And then I found it also in Tony Robbins and Zig Ziglar. They were saying things that were
Mhm.
in alignment as well. I think there's universal truth.
Yeah.
And you were saying earlier about people who want to now live a spiritual life. Living life is spiritual. And it's like, people like you, Kim, I over the past few days, I've had so many comments on our interview, and you are profoundly loved, and people are always
Oh,
constantly saying how humble you are, how clear you are, how, and that's what I saw too, right? That is a spiritual life. Living, loving is spiritual,
right.
right?
Loving. Yeah.
And for me, because I had these experiences and now I had this information, I had to live loving. And that's why I had to look at this information and realize this information is not for me. I have to share it because that is the loving thing to do, which always makes me smile when I realize that past life was John the Beloved, right? So you got to be
Right.
loved, right? And
Right.
so to me, that's kind of what it is. Most people search their life for that spiritual journey, and a lot of people who are in the metaphysical world and the I hate to say it this way, the woo-woo world. I hate to say it that way because it's just not true. It's
Right.
it's a disparagement per se, but I hear it all the time, so I'll say
Mhm.
it. A lot of them are always looking for the next aha moment. They go and they see that next speaker and they go, oh, wow, you believe what they said? And then 2
Right.
months later, say, I just saw this person. Oh, wow, my life has changed. And it's every couple of months you hear them say, oh, wow, I figured it out finally.
Yeah.
And I truly believe it. And this is in the regression. It is so simple that we can't grasp it. And
Right.
every religion in the world is trying to grasp it. But that's why there's universal truth in all of it. You were talking earlier about Eckhart Tolle's interpretation of Jesus's teachings.
Mhm.
There's another book out there, and if you really want to get into some real deep spirituality reading, The Second Coming of Christ by Yogananda. It's a huge book. It's 2 books about this thick with very thin paper. So, they're giant books. But what it is Yogananda putting Jesus's teachings side by side with Hinduism. And he channels a bunch of the information. He taps into a whole bunch of stuff. And then the more you study him talking about, what Jesus is teaching, and then when you travel through India, you hear about the prophet Isa. Do you know about the prophet Isa in India?
No.
So check this out. Check this out. You're gonna love this.
That's how humble I am. Nope, I don't.
All right. So you're wandering through India and you're talking to the yogis and the gurus and you're hearing about spirituality, and every so often somebody says the prophet Isa. the prophet Isa. And they tell you when prophet Isa was traveling through this region, he stayed here, he taught there, he did this, that, the other thing. And the more they talk, and then finally one day I said to somebody, I said, so whatever happened to the prophet Isa? And they said he went back to his homeland and was crucified. Right. And Isa was in India in the time between Jesus as a child and Jesus when he was 30 and returned to Israel, Jerusalem.
Oh, wow.
Right. So they believe that Isa is Jesus. Now, to really dig into this, Isa is a nickname for Jesus or Jeshua in that time frame. So in Israel. So, and I know somebody else who had a past life and regression, and she remembered being in that time frame. She wasn't one of the disciples, but she knew him. She was there, and she called him Isa in the regression.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Right?
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you look at Yogananda's book where he's comparing them side by side. They're identical. Jesus's teachings, the things that he said, were identical to Hinduism. And
that's fascinating.
It is fascinating. It really is. You know, it's you look at Buddha and Krishna and even Muhammad. You know, Muhammad gets a bad rap, and Muhammad. One of my favorite Muhammad quotes is "He who knows not kindness has no faith." And there's so many people in the world who want to berate Islam, but they don't know anything about it.
Right.
Islam means peace, and to be a Muslim means you're a follower of peace. So anybody who is creating atrocities in the name of Islam is not a Muslim, right? Because it's not part of the doctrine, right? It's just like, you know, Hitler.
And that's an old story, right? Because we've seen atrocities committed in Christianity. We've seen, you know,
Well, and interestingly enough, it's interestingly enough, the most detrimental religion in the world has been Christianity. I mean, it has done more damage in the name of Jesus, even to this day. I mean, George Bush took us into Iraq. He literally told the Saudi Arabian prince, God told him to invade Iraq. That was a Christian God that told him to invade Iraq, right? And when you look at the problem with once you organize a religion around an avatar or a deity. And we can get into the history of this because I know a lot about the history of the changes in Christianity. But when you look at the whole idea of putting a structure around an avatar, what happens is you now created a bureaucracy around it. Bureaucracy around it, right?
Bureaucracy.
right. Man, my English is bad. And then things get slow. Right. And now I'll tell you how slow they got. 1986 was a great year. You know, Ferris Bueller's Day Off came out, and Big Trouble in Little China was at the movie theaters. I know you're a movie buff, so I'm pulling out movies.
I graduated high school. So
right. You know what else happened in 1986? The Catholic Church forgave Galileo for the world not being flat. Right. And about 6 years ago, St. Francis apologized to Central America for what the conquistadors did. You know, so that's how far behind they are right now, and that's not love. That's not loving. You know, I think the organized structure has stepped us away from the fact that we're supposed to be in a loving space and living it daily and living it in this present moment. Right. Sorry, I got on my soapbox there for a second.
No. And that's a lot of that. I mean, and I think that you go into a lot of this kind of thing on Spirit Cafe. You kind of talk about organized religion and how it can, you know, it's I think it's a necessary thing that it's because it's some people that's just where they are, but also it's also it can become very constraining, constricting.
I completely agree. I have no problem with anybody's religion as long as it's loving. Right. The second thing is harmful, then I have a problem with it because that's harm is coming out of fear. Right.
I totally agree with you. And John, right before we talk about what you're doing next, what's happening next, which is really, I'm so excited you're going to launch it here, but you know, but I wanted to ask you something, and I want to just ask you to kind of I guess tune into your intuition, if I can, just to ask this question. Two questions, actually. Why is the spirit of John Beloved back now? And why, and do you think there are other, I'm getting chills as I'm asking this, so that's interesting, but, and do you believe there are other apostles walking on the earth also right now? And why?
Well,
Why now?
Okay. So I have met people who I know that I knew from that life.
Okay. I'm getting chills right now. So,
right, right.
Yeah.
I was in a room one time and a man walked in and I turned to someone next to me and says, "That's Peter." And I recognize, I mean, the physical body right there. That's the guy. And I just knew it. Right. And they came, and it's interesting because they came there thinking his wife was Peter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so they were like, I said, he is.
Interesting.
Right,
Oh,
right.
wow. That's fascinating.
Very interesting. But as far as why is John the Beloved back? I ponder that myself because having studied a lot of religions and studying a lot of spiritual thought, in Hinduism, they think about us being the center hub of a wheel and each of the spokes of the wheel being a different life that we've lived. And then the outer rim is the Akashic records or the complete understanding of our entire existence. So I often wonder whether or not we are all back, or are those of us who have had that big soul experience, the veil is just getting thinner for everybody, and we're becoming aware of it. Now, do I think there's a big reason? When I when I look at my life and my intuition, I ask that question a lot. Why do I have all these weird things happening to me? And I've been told in my intuition, because I have my moments of clarity as well.
Right, of course.
And I've been told flat out that I am supposed to be here to hold this vibration here. Right. And what's really interesting to me is that there is I think it was, I don't know whether it was Edgar Casey or the Paul Solomon readings that talked about the incarnation of John staying in physical form until to keep that vibration here, basically, to keep that feeling here. And so to me, that means constant reincarnation, coming from this life to that life to this life to that life. And I told you earlier I had spina bifida occulta. That's a birth defect. I often wonder whether the birth defect was carried over from another life, right? There's actually a quote in the Bible where the disciples asked Jesus why a man who was born blind. They asked him whether it was his sins or his parents' sins, and Jesus said he's blind from what he did before he came. And so I think we carry things over from other lives. Is there a bigger, grander picture? And that's the question that everyone always gets. Is there a bigger, why are all the apostles showing up? Why did Nick Bunick, realize his life of the apostle Paul? And I know someone who I've traveled the world with who I know full well is Philip.
Right.
And I lorded over him every day that, the only reason Philip's even in the Bible is because John wrote it. In your face. But when I think that we are coming to a very specific time, and I think we're coming to an age of enlightenment. I think the veil is thinner. As I said earlier, Sufism has that veil that is our fear. And I think, once again, the reason we're seeing the right and the left get so crazy is because their fear is bubbling up, whereas because the veil is thinner and they're getting panicky about it. So do I think there's a big, giant, grand scheme? Not really. Right. I just think the vibrations are getting better and we're getting, and for me personally, I believe that because the veil has been getting thinner for me my entire life, which is why I had out-of-body experiences. At some point we could talk about all of the studies I did. I did astral travel and had crazy experience. I had one time where I was trying to go out of body and suddenly found myself standing in front of a man who literally said to me, "You're not supposed to be here yet." And,
Oh, wow.
and I was like, "Okay." And it was so weird because when I opened my eyes and he was standing there, I felt like a child. I felt like I didn't know anything. And I was
Right.
just in complete awe. He says, "You're not supposed to be here yet." And
Yeah.
boom, I was back in my life. Oh, so I really think the veil is thinner. And I think for
Yeah.
some people, the veil is even thinner. And I think that's what's been happening with me is my veil is fairly thin. And let me just say this. I don't believe in hierarchy. I don't believe anybody is more powerful than anybody else. I think
Mhm.
everybody has their own different experiences. And I don't think that anybody should look at someone who's having massive experiences and think that they are special, because the only difference really is that they're doing stuff that you can do. You just haven't done it yet.
Okay.
And when I talk to corporations, I talk about leadership. I said, if two people are leaving for a trip to the same destination and one person leaves 2 hours before the other, is that person who left first better than the person who hasn't left yet? Obviously not, right? But
Right.
the difference between the two is the one who's 2 hours down the road has more responsibility. They have to make sure they are communicating the pitfalls and the challenges along the path so that next people can make it easier to the destination. And so to me, that's the responsibility that I feel right now is I've had this experience, I've gotten this information, and now I've got to come back and show the pitfalls and challenges and get people to the destination quicker.
I love that. I've never heard it put that way, but I love that. I know exactly what you're talking about. Because when I started to do this, I was like, I felt right away that um, one of the things I should be focusing on is demystifying this, letting people know you can do this. It isn't something that's bestowed on just a few, choice people that can. This is something you can learn, and it's and so I totally I love how you put that. That's exactly as was my experience as well. That
And let me say this: if anybody in here wants to check out their intuition, right? Think of something they're going through in life, and think of something that they would want a yes or no answer about. Okay, something that they think they're thinking they want to do this, but what does other people think? And just get a group of friends that all you can do is text them, yes or no, question mark, right? And what I do this all the time. And what I get is when I'm thinking yes, they all think yes. When I'm thinking no, they all think no. There's some who overthink it, but if they blurt it right out. And my best friend from childhood, my friend Tim, we just did an interview with him because we talked about friendship and spirituality. Is it the same thing? And I called him. I said yes or no, and he says, I can't cuss on I won't cuss on your thing, but he dropped an F-bomb and he said, "Oh, yes." Right. And he doesn't consider himself gifted in that way. We all have that intuition.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it literally comes down to living our empathy. Because every one of us has had the experience where we've walked into a room where an argument has just happened and we felt the room.
Right.
Everybody, oh, what's something wrong? This ain't right.
Tension in the room.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's what intuition is. Intuition is feeling that expression that's being put out into the world. And so when you look when you say, what do you think of this? Oh, yes, that's just intuition talking,
Right.
And everybody can do it. Everybody can do it.
That's right. And I always go back to the Brian Weiss quote, the feeling is the truth, the mind is the lie.
Right.
When that's exactly what that is. That intuition is that feeling that is the truth. That is the truth. Right. That's the thing that's connected to source.
Can I ask you a question? Because sure. I'm fascinated by the work you do. Oh. When you're doing a private session with someone, or do you ever get a specific name of someone?
It's rare. I don't get names that often. And one reason I think is because one time I asked the question to spirit about spirit guides. And I asked about names. do spirit guides have names?
Mhm.
And they said, names and labels, that's an earth thing. That's not an
Right,
us thing, that's an
right,
earth thing. So how we recognize one another is in the spirit realm is, it's almost like what it was explained to me was like almost like a spirit DNA. And
right,
we're all unique, and we recognize each other's energy, and that's our name
right,
basically.
right,
And they can put it into a name if we want
right,
it. They can give us a name to tell us something about them, or to give us an idea of who they are that will
right.
speak to us. But names is
Yeah.
an us thing. And so
Well,
and so after that, I think maybe that's why I don't get names that often. I don't know. Yeah.
I want to just share a quick story because I think
Yeah.
as a reader, you'll find this fascinating. I had a guy sit down in one of the sessions that I was doing with him, and he sat down and you could feel his presence. He was special. And I don't mean special like better, but there was something different there.
Right.
Right.
Something different. Yeah.
Right. And I'm sitting here and I'm talking to him about this stuff. And I kept getting this name in my head. And I said, do you know somebody whose last name is Mancini? And he says, yeah. I said, and the first name starts with a D and it's a woman. He says, no, it's a man. I said, no, it's a woman and her name is Dolores Mancini. He goes, oh my God, it's his mother. We call her Dolly. Now, the reason I wanted to tell this story is because it ties into what I said earlier in that first lesson. What the message that came through for him was Dolly had recently lost someone close to her brother, actually. And I didn't know it was her brother until he told me. But she had been declaring with her thoughts, words, and deeds that she was heartbroken. And it was manifesting into a heart ailment. And so I needed to tell him this so he could tell her that he's okay. And, he's in a much better place, and help her get past her being heartbroken and ask her to please stop declaring it. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And so now earlier on, I said, what we think we become. If you think your heart broken, obviously it's going to manifest in the heart, right? To me, that's how simple it is. It literally is how simple it is.
That's incredible. Yeah. That's amazing. I wanted to have you kind of talk about what you're doing now, and also why you decided to do it. Why you decided, that this was the format and this was the way you want to do it, and what you hope it is for people.
Well, let's start with the last thing, the why I decided to do it. I'm a firm believer that when spirit pushes, you just say, okay. Right.
Because the pushes will just get harder.
Oh my God. I was to give you an idea about pushes. I over the years, I've learned that when it pushes, just go with it. Right.
Yeah.
And I was going to bed one night and I looked at my iPad and on Facebook, and a friend of mine popped up, and I said, oh, I got to tell her to stop worrying about her and her hip will stop hurting. Right. So I hadn't talked to this woman in a couple of years. Right.
Oh, wow.
So I just sent her a message and went off to bed. And she sent me, oh my God, how'd you know my hip was hurting? It was like, and I said to her, I just do what I'm told,
Right.
I have been feeling the push back towards getting this message out. Right. And spirit has been telling me it's time. Right. And meeting Tamara and having me vomit the story out, and then meeting you and vomiting the story out, meeting Justin and vomit. Obviously, it's meant to happen now. But when you sent me the message asking me to come on and talk about reincarnation, it made me think. And I texted my friend Holly and I said yes or no, and she said yes. And I texted my sister and I said yes or no, and she said yes. And I texted my friend Tim and he said F yes. And Tamara has been so supportive in all this as well, because she knows that it's important to me. Right. And when your message came in, it was the sign. It was the moment where it was like, okay, here's Kim. She's asking me about reincarnation. She's being so kind and saying you can share as much or as little as you want.
Right.
because she knew because I had already told you that I was not. But you said, and I was like, okay, I'll share it all. So what did I do? Okay. I started building the website, right? And like I
Right.
instantly, I put up the new YouTube channel, John of New, has 2 videos on it right now. One of them
that's great.
is just the trailer, and the other one is the first lesson I learned from that past life, which we kind of discussed on this
Mhm.
interview. And I'm going to be putting out more and more on that YouTube channel. And on top of that, I went in the past when I traveled around the country, I used to sell my the recording of my regression, and I'm going to be re-uploading that, so it'll be available for digital download and a CD at some point. And I'll do a video about that. It'll probably be releasing within the next week or so. So if you're really fascinated by that and you want to hear that, it will be available.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah.
I've been writing a book for about a year, and it's it's kind of funny. It's called The Recovering Catholic's Guide to Spirituality. And it literally is all the lessons I learned from that past life, but it's a book that has a lot of laughs, because I was a comedian for a long time, so has a lot of funny stories in it. But it's about taking people who are Easter Christmas Catholics and showing them what spirituality really is, because there's a bunch of them in the world. So
Right.
that's coming that's coming out in the near future. There's just a whole bunch of things going on, but the YouTube channel is new. I just put it up yesterday. In fact, I recorded both of those videos this morning.
Oh, great.
And so yeah, it's you were the final push that got me going towards it.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I'm never giving up on Spirit Cafe, because that is such a joy working with Tamara on,
Yeah.
and she's such a lovely person, and we get to bring on such cool guests like yourself. What we
such
learned.
A good show. It's such a fun show. It's such a good show. So I hope people check it out. And Tamara's going to come on and I'm going to talk to her a little bit about being positive during this, a tumultuous time, how we do that.
Let me
which
tell you,
I can't wait to talk to her.
let me tell you a little bit about the first time I ever saw Tamara,
Yeah.
because it'll give you an example of what you're going to do on your show.
Yeah.
I was speaking at an event in Michigan, and I did the big speech, and then I did a workshop. And I went to the workshop room, and I was getting all set up, moving tables around. It was like a dark, dingy, like almost cave-like room. And people started coming in, and they were treating it like it was a church. They weren't saying anything. They were staying all timid and quiet.
Yeah.
And suddenly this beautiful woman walks into the back of the room, and we're not a couple in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Right. It's just a beautiful woman walks back, and
Yeah.
she walks in, and you could feel her enter the room. She has this presence, right? And everybody in the room smiled, and then started talking to her. She started engaging back and forth, and the entire room went from being dingy to being bright, just by her being in it. And that's why when I finally found her again on LinkedIn, I was like, I want to interview her because of what she did to that room.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have a great interview with her.
It translates through the screen, even with her.
Yeah.
So I'm anxious for people to meet her, because she's she's such a lovely spirit. You can just feel it. So
yeah, she is.
Well, John, I'm going to put the links to everything below so that people
Great.
can find all of this. And I hope they check out Spirit Cafe and your new channel. I'm excited about that. I can't wait for that to get going.
Well, and if they want to find out about that regression and the books and all that, they'll be released as videos about them on that YouTube channel. So keep an eye on that channel.
Great. So one-stop shopping there.
Yeah. Well, eventually they'll all be on the website, but that's where it'll be announced.
That's awesome. That's so great. Well, thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate
pleasure.
this. I don't know how hard this was for you. I hope it wasn't hard. I hope it was just a good experice, because I know people are going to benefit from it.
It was a very, very good experience. It was scary.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you.
Because
for 10 years, I was like, no. But you brought it out of me.
I'm so glad, because I think it will help so many people, and it will make people think, and it will make people, be curious about their own reasons why they're here. I hope that it
Yeah.
really opens it up for people. So thank you, John. And
Thank,
we'll
thank
talk to you.
you.
I hope we talk to you again. And
Anytime.
everybody, and have a good day, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. And thanks for tuning in. Bye.